He was more than just muscle. He was strength. He was an example. While most guys chased the mirror, he was busy building a legacy. A man who defied logic, science, and time. A name that still echoes in gyms all over the world. John Grimek wasn't just a bodybuilder. He was a living legend. Want to know why? Then grab your pre-workout and come along for a journey that goes way beyond the physical. Get ready to meet the man who transformed the sport and never had to lose a single competition to conquer the world. John Grimek's story begins on June 17, 1910, in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. The son of Slovak immigrants, he grew up in a modest home where values like hard work, humility, and dedication were the norm. But it was inside that very home, watching his older brother George, that little John discovered something that would change his life forever: physical culture. George was a training fanatic, always bringing home new weights and strength magazines. That early curiosity sparked something deep in John. By the time he was 12, he was secretly training with his brother's weights. Maybe he was shy, maybe unsure of himself, but he preferred to stay out of sight. What started as a hidden hobby quickly turned into an unstoppable passion. Those quiet moments lifting alone were the first steps of a journey that would change bodybuilding forever. That skinny kid wasn't just building his body. He was shaping the discipline and mental strength of a true athlete. As a teen, John already showed signs of freak genetics. With insane proportions and a powerful presence, he turned heads wherever he went. At 19, he decided to snap some physique photos and send them to muscle magazines. The response was instant. Editors were blown away by his potential. He'd pose creatively outdoors, sometimes wearing capes or sashes, which made him stand out even more from the crowd of lifters back then. Those first features in magazines opened big doors and caught the attention of major figures in the fitness world, like Mark Berry, editor of Strength magazine. Berry didn't just see talent, he invited Grimek to train with him. And that was a game changer. John moved in to live and train under Berry's wing, who also happened to coach the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team. Under that expert guidance, Grimek didn't just get smarter, he got bigger and way stronger. During that time, Grimek started packing on serious muscle mass, tipping the scales at over 245 pounds. That's 110 plus kg. He was all about heavy barbell training, focusing on strength and endurance long before the modern split routines became a thing. That combo of intense training and elite genetics created a rare kind of athlete, one who impressed with both aesthetics and raw power. But beyond the muscle and brute strength, what truly set John Grimek apart was his mindset. From early on, he had a kind of healthy obsession with self-improvement, always hungry to learn and push past his own limits. He didn't train just to look good. He trained to be better every single day. And that mindset would go on to inspire thousands of lifters around the globe for decades to come. The 1930s were a turning point in Grimek's athletic development. After gaining visibility through magazine spreads, he accepted the invite to train with Mark Berry, one of the biggest names in American weightlifting. Moving to York, Pennsylvania, wasn't just a change of scenery. It marked the beginning of a whole new chapter of intense training alongside one of the most respected coaches of the time. With Berry's guidance, John shifted his focus to Olympic weightlifting. His workouts were brutal, technical, and high-level. He bulked up fast, going from a lean build to a jaw-dropping 250 pounds, 113 kilograms of solid muscle, without losing a bit of mobility or agility. Even though his training methods were old school compared to today's standards, he was already showing signs of being a total phenomenon. All that progress led to one of the most iconic moments of his career, qualifying for the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. He stood out in the trials and made history as part of the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team. Originally scheduled to compete as a light heavyweight, he ended up bumping up to the heavyweight class, going toe-to-toe with the biggest beasts in the sport. Even as the lightest guy in the heavyweight division, he finished 9th, a seriously impressive result given the circumstances. More than the result itself, what truly stood out from that Olympic experience was how John represented his country, with strength, humility, and unwavering determination. He didn't flinch in the face of challenges. If anything, they seemed to make him stronger. His presence at the games didn't go unnoticed, getting plenty of coverage in strength and fitness magazines. It was around that time people began to see him as more than a weightlifter. He was becoming a true symbol of American strength. After the Olympics, he kept competing in national and international weightlifting events, scoring titles like the 1938 North American Championship in the light heavyweight division. But something inside him began to shift. Even with all the wins, John felt that bodybuilding offered something more, a way to combine strength, symmetry, and physical expression. It was like the stage was calling out to him. Back then, bodybuilding still wasn't taken seriously as a sport. A lot of people saw bodybuilders as nothing more than show-offs. But John was determined to change that perception. He wanted to prove that you could have an aesthetic physique and still perform at the highest level. That kind of combo was almost unheard of at the time, and it's what would eventually put him in a whole different league compared to other athletes. In 1939, after years of Olympic lifting, John Grimek finally stepped onto a bodybuilding stage for the first time. The event was the York Perfect Man contest, still small and low-key in the U.S. scene, but destined to become legendary for revealing the man who would change the sport forever. Grimek didn't just win. He stunned the crowd with a stage presence no one had ever seen before, blending strength, symmetry, and expression in a way that felt revolutionary. His official crowning moment came in 1940 when he entered the Mr. America, the most prestigious bodybuilding competition in the country at the time. John dominated the event, taking both the main title and the most muscular trophy, leaving the judges and the crowd in total awe. His performance was so iconic that people started saying no one else could top him. A star had been born. The following year, in 1941, he came back to the Mr. America stage and did it all over again. Once again, Grimek walked away as the undisputed champion. It was like he'd been sculpted by hand for that stage. Every pose, every angle, showing off a rare level of control over his body. That's when the organizers made a bold decision. Past winners could no longer compete. Why? Because nobody else stood a chance against John. His physique was praised from every possible angle. Muscle density, perfect balance between upper and lower body, definition, and sheer mass. But there was more than just technique. There was an aura about him, something almost hypnotic. That's when he earned his most famous nickname, the Glow, given by a journalist from Strength and Health magazine. It wasn't just about how his skin looked under the lights. It was the way he lit up any room he walked into. John wasn't just strong or good-looking. He was magnetic. His presence, confidence, and stage command were way ahead of his time. While other athletes posed stiffly, he moved with fluidity, created seamless transitions, and pulled off rare feats like one-arm push-ups and muscle control tricks that rippled through his body like a wave. It was performance art in motion, and it raised the bar for the entire sport. Despite all the accolades, success never made him arrogant. Quite the opposite. Grimek was known for being kind and humble with fans and fellow athletes. He knew his role was bigger than just winning trophies. He was paving the way for a new generation. And that's how he became a role model, not just as a competitor, but as a symbol of a sport that was finally finding its identity. After a few years away from the stage, John Grimek made a legendary comeback in 1948 with the same glow and dominance that made him a household name. This time, it was an international challenge, the NABBA Mr. Universe in London. The European stage was set to showcase the best physiques in the world, and among the competitors was a young rising star, Steve Reeves, known for his flawless aesthetics and movie star charisma. But even Reeves' charm wasn't enough to dethrone the king. Grimek took the win with authority, proving once again he was still the standard to beat. That victory in London wasn't just big, it was a statement. It showed the world that time hadn't dulled his impact. At 38 years old, Grimek proved that experience and consistency could still outshine youthful energy. The international press was blown away. One British journalist even wrote, "The man who steps on stage after Grimek will inevitably look smaller. So powerful was his presence and charisma." In 1949, he stepped on a competitive stage for the very last time, and once again made history. At the Mr. USA, he went up against not only Steve Reeves, but also other big names of the era like Clarence Ross, George Eiferman, and Armand Tanny. It was without a doubt one of the most stacked lineups of the classic era. And just as everyone expected, Grimek won again, closing out his career with an unbelievable stat. He never lost a single contest. Even today, it's incredibly rare to find an athlete who stayed undefeated at the top. Grimek pulled that off in a time when training tools were limited, supplements were basically non-existent, and most workouts were driven by instinct and discipline instead of modern sports science. And yet, he dominated. His consistency, mental focus, and control over his body were simply unmatched. But retiring from competition didn't mean saying goodbye to bodybuilding, not even close. Grimek knew his role was bigger than winning trophies. He had set a standard, both physically and ethically, and now he would shift gears to become a mentor, a magazine editor, and a lifelong inspiration for future generations. It was like he left the stage not because he couldn't compete, but because his mission there was already complete. That final victory also carried a symbolic weight. Beating Steve Reeves 2 years in a row didn't just confirm his dominance. It cemented his legacy as the greatest of his time. While most athletes fade from memory over the years, Grimek kept being mentioned, studied, and admired. His retirement wasn't the end. It was the transformation of a stage champion into an eternal symbol of classic bodybuilding. One of the most remarkable things about John Grimek was how he combined raw strength with refined aesthetics. At a time when most athletes specialized in one or the other, he stood out as a total outlier. His physique wasn't just impressive to look at. It was incredibly functional, showing a rare mix of proportion, muscle density, and performance. Looking at Grimek was like seeing a body built with patience, intelligence, and brutal intensity. His stats speak for themselves. Standing at 5 feet 8 inches, 1.74 meters, his weight ranged between 195 to 225 pounds, 88 to 102 kilograms, offering a balanced and dense look. His 19.3-inch, 49 centimeters, arms were eye-catching, but what really stood out was the full package. A 50-inch chest, 127 centimeters, a tight 30-inch waist, 76 centimeters, 29-inch thighs, 73 centimeters, and 20-inch calves, 50 centimeters. From the front or the side, his silhouette was on point, exactly what you want on any competitive stage. But Grimek wasn't just about stats and size. He also racked up some of the most jaw-dropping strength feats of his generation. He squatted 700 pounds, 317 kilograms, deadlifted 600 pounds, 272 kilograms, benched 480 pounds, 218 kilograms, and military pressed 364 pounds, 165 kilograms. There was no doubt his muscles weren't just for show. They were built to perform. And these numbers are even more insane when you think about the era. Back in the 30s and 40s, equipment was basic. No modern Olympic bars, no adjustable racks, no lifting shoes. Everything was done raw, with real grit and effort. And still, Grimek was lifting numbers that even today's athletes struggle to match, despite all the high-tech gear and optimized programming available now. On top of that, he had absolute control over every muscle. He could hit poses that required extreme coordination and isometric strength. It wasn't unusual to see him do one-arm push-ups, splits, or isolated muscle contractions in performances that blended art and technique. It made it clear this wasn't just a trained body. It was a body fully mastered inside and out. Another thing that set Grimek apart was his muscle density. Unlike a lot of modern athletes who only look full during peak week, he stayed big and defined year-round thanks to consistent training and a focus on compound movements. His physique was the result of decades of effort, not water manipulation or last-minute hacks. He looked solid, almost like he was carved out of stone. If you're expecting to hear about some strict, rule-heavy diet full of food scales and macro breakdowns, think again. Even with one of the most legendary physiques in bodybuilding history, Grimek didn't follow rigid meal plans. He believed in common sense, balance, and the body's ability to adapt when it's fed and trained properly. To him, the real secret wasn't obsessing over every bite. It was staying consistent over the long haul. John ate everything. Sure, he prioritized nutritious foods like meats, eggs, milk, veggies, and grains, but he never denied himself the occasional treat. His friend and protege Bill Pearl once shared that. Right before a contest, he saw Grimek casually eating a chocolate bar. That one moment shattered the myth that you had to suffer to stay in shape. And in fact, John's wife used to say he'd eat anything you put on his plate. No fuss, no weird food hang-ups. That laid-back approach to food was part of a bigger lifestyle. Instead of obsessing over trendy diets, John focused on training hard and consistently, sleeping well, and having a natural relationship with food. His physique was the result of decades of solid habits, not short-term restriction phases. That's what kept him strong, healthy, and functional well into old age. And here's another way he was ahead of his time. John was one of the first to use powdered protein as a supplement. Back then, that was practically unheard of. Even with limited options, he understood the importance of protein for muscle recovery and growth. His openness to supplementation showed he wasn't stuck in the past. He was a curious athlete, always experimenting and learning from his own body. That blend of flexible eating and smart supplementation created something powerful: longevity. While many athletes fall apart after retirement, Grimek stayed strong, active, and healthy until the end of his life. At 60, he was still squatting over 400 pounds, 180 kilograms. At 80, he was still considered a benchmark for vitality. It just goes to show a smart, balanced approach to food can outlast any extreme diet trend. Have you ever stopped to think about your own relationship with food? Sometimes chasing diet perfection actually takes us further away from health and performance. John proved that balance can be way more effective than extremes. Eat well, yes, but without losing your mind. Train hard, of course, but enjoy the process. That was the core of his philosophy. Consistency through simplicity. After closing his competitive career with an undefeated record, John Grimek didn't fade into the background. Not even close. He simply shifted his focus from the stage to the page, from posing to writing. That's when he entered one of the most important phases of his journey: mentoring and educating the next generation of athletes. He took on the role of editor at Strength and Health and later Muscular Development, two of the most influential bodybuilding publications of all time. His presence in those magazines wasn't just symbolic. He wrote regularly, reviewed content, selected article topics, and insisted on high standards of accuracy and value. While some publications were leaning toward sensationalism, John stayed grounded in serious educational content. From 1964 to 1985, he published dozens of articles on training techniques, nutrition tips, ethics in sports, and how to achieve long-term health. To him, bodybuilding wasn't just about looks, it was a full lifestyle involving body, mind, and spirit. And that's exactly what he tried to convey in every article. Readers didn't just see a successful athlete, they saw a real mentor. The pages he curated and wrote became sources of motivation and guidance for thousands of young lifters around the world. John also made it a mission to preserve the sport's history. He highlighted past athletes, honored the pioneers, and brought attention to achievements that might have otherwise been forgotten. To him, knowing the roots of bodybuilding was key to building a strong future. His editorial work helped shape the sport's identity during a time of rapid change and growth. On top of that, his name on the cover brought instant credibility. It was like every issue came stamped with a seal of approval from someone who had truly lived what he preached. Countless readers said his articles were what first got them into training. Others said it was thanks to Grimek that they realized bodybuilding could be healthy, balanced, and sustainable. He was also known for being incredibly generous with beginners. He answered letters, gave advice, and genuinely cared about others' progress. Even after becoming a legend, he never stopped being a teacher, humble, approachable, and passionate about helping others learn. That educational spirit made him more than just a role model for a generation. It shaped how people think about bodybuilding as a whole. John Grimek wasn't just a great physique, he was a thinker when it came to training. His workout philosophy was simple, straightforward, and incredibly effective. While people today often overcomplicate things with endless variations and flashy techniques, John lived by one principle: do the basics well, and you'll win. His go-to training style was full-body workouts 3 times a week, with total focus on proper form and consistency. The format John popularized was the classic 3x10, 3 sets of 10 reps for each exercise. But what made it different was how he applied it. Instead of splitting up muscle groups across different days, he preferred full-body workouts every session. That meant he could hit the big compound lifts more often, which led to greater progress over time, especially in strength, muscle density, and overall conditioning. His go-to exercises were mostly compound movements: bench press, squats, bent over rows, military press, pull-ups. John understood that these lifts worked multiple muscle groups at once, leading to real, functional gains. He believed the details would take care of themselves as long as the foundation was solid. Instead of overcomplicating things, he optimized them, a lesson many people still miss today. Rest periods were another key part of his method. John recommended 45 seconds to 1 minute between sets, and 2 to 3 minutes between full cycles. This kept the pace up without sacrificing performance. Plus, he believed in listening to the body. If his form started to break down, he'd stop immediately and lower the weight. That showed respect for his body, something a lot of lifters still ignore in favor of ego lifting. He also emphasized changing up the stimulus. Not every workout had to be heavy. In his view, alternating between light and heavy sessions was essential to avoid overtraining, stay motivated, and keep progressing without getting injured. That smart variation kept the body guessing and helped dodge the usual plateaus and burnout. For John, perfect form wasn't negotiable. He'd say that the moment you lose control of the movement, the workout stops being productive and starts being risky. And that mindset stuck with him for life. At 60 years old, he was still squatting over 400 pounds, 180 kilograms, no cheating, no rushing. Just pure technique, patience, and consistency. Back in the 1940s, lifting weights was still looked at with skepticism by most of society, including the scientific community. Many doctors and college professors believed weight training made you stiff, hurt your flexibility, and could even be harmful to your health. In the middle of that conservative mindset, John emerged not just as someone who questioned those ideas. He crushed them with his very presence. One of the loudest critics of weight training was Professor Peter Karpovich from Springfield College. He was a respected authority in physical education and often argued that athletes should stay away from weightlifting to protect their performance. But that all changed when one of his students organized an academic forum and invited none other than John Grimek to give a live demonstration. John knew talk wasn't enough. He had to show. On stage, in front of students, faculty, and Karpovich himself, he started off with controlled muscle poses, showing precise, refined control. Then he shocked everyone by performing extreme flexibility moves, including full splits, all while weighing over 220 pounds, 100 kilograms. It blew people's minds. The muscle monster was more mobile than many gymnasts. The reaction was immediate. Karpovich, once a fierce opponent of weight training, was left speechless. Faced with undeniable proof, he admitted he was wrong. Even more incredible, he didn't just change his mind, he became a vocal supporter of weightlifting. He went on to publish academic books on muscle physiology, helping legitimize strength training as a healthy and functional practice. One act by Grimek, one massive leap for the sport. That moment was a turning point. Weightlifting began to be seen not just as a vanity tool, but as a legit path to health, performance, and applied science. And the man responsible for that shift wasn't a lab-coated researcher. It was an athlete who proved with his own body what outdated theories couldn't deny. The takeaway is clear. You don't always need a debate to change someone's mind. Sometimes the best argument is a living example. Grimek showed the world that muscles aren't a barrier to functionality. They're an asset when built intelligently. And thanks to him, training programs, research, and fitness practices all over the world began to evolve. John Grimek wasn't just a strong body on stage. He was a symbol of integrity, versatility, and unshakable dedication. His legacy goes far beyond bodybuilding and touches many aspects of life. During the Great Depression, while most people were just trying to survive, Grimek was working as a model in New York City, making $80 a week, a small fortune at the time. Even in those gigs, he carried himself like an athlete, with the same pride and presence he brought to the sport. Throughout his life, he wore many hats: athlete, coach, editor, writer, mentor. And he poured his heart into every role, always with the same mission: elevate the sport and help others reach their full potential. And it was never just about muscles or strength. It was about ethics, commitment, and a genuine love for physical culture. Grimek truly saw bodybuilding as both an art form and a calling. His impact was so deep that some of the biggest names in the game openly recognized his greatness. Joe Weider, one of the most influential figures in bodybuilding history, once said Grimek was the greatest force in bodybuilding from 1930 to 1960. And legendary coach Bill Starr put it even more bluntly: the most admired man in physical culture. These weren't random fan comments. They came from icons who shaped the sport and saw in John the ultimate example of greatness. Despite all the fame, John stayed humble. He kept training until his final days. Even in old age, he was still hitting the gym, helping young lifters, and keeping his body strong and functional. At 80, his posture and energy were still rock solid. He never stopped, never walked away for what he loved. Because for him, bodybuilding wasn't just a phase, it was a way of life. But what really set John apart was how perfectly aligned his actions were with his words. He didn't talk about training with discipline. He lived it. He didn't preach about balance. He practiced it in every part of his life. That integrity made people admire not just his physique, but his character. He wasn't just a model of aesthetics. He was a model of conduct. On November 20th, 1998, the bodybuilding world said goodbye to one of its greatest icons. John Grimek passed away in York, Pennsylvania, at the age of 88, surrounded by the respect of everyone who had followed his journey. But the end of his life didn't mark the end of his influence. If anything, it made it stronger. The following year, he was officially inducted into the IFBB Hall of Fame, a much-deserved recognition for the man who paved the way for so many. More than trophies and records, John left a legacy that transcends generations. His image is immortalized in a mural in York, where his story lives on for all who pass by. His iconic silhouette became the symbol of NABA, representing the grace, strength, and balance of a physique that defined an entire era. But what truly made him immortal was the example he left behind. John showed us that true greatness isn't just about what happens on stage. It's about how you live when the lights are off. He was a man who combined discipline with humility, strength with kindness, aesthetics with purpose. He proved that you can reach the top without losing your respect, your simplicity, or your love for the journey. In a world that often only values results, he reminded us of the power of consistency and integrity. If John Grimek's story inspired you in any way, hit that like button. It really helps the channel keep bringing you stories about the legends of bodybuilding. And if you want to support our work even more, consider becoming a member and joining a community that truly values the sport. Drop a comment below. Had you heard John Grimek before? What part of his story impressed you the most? Let's talk down there. Your opinion adds so much to the conversation. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next videos. There's a lot more coming. Stories of athletes who defined eras and left lessons that go way beyond the physical.